first question, and of course, you saw my opening address. It's all about the utter bollocks that we see out there in the industry. Shai didn't, but you'll see it in the live stream. Has the industry lost its way? We have this jabber on APIs. Dinesh was showing it's not just APIs and has been very successful in doing something more than APIs. Of course, I've already talked about AI, digital transformation. The other classic one is video is the new voice. Actually, Dialogic has that trademarked, so be careful when you're using it. And of course, it's more than cloud. So I'm just interested in the audience, the panel's thoughts around, have we lost focus on what programmable telecoms can do? And I'll pick on Thomas, because you're closest.
Better?
Yep.
Hey, there I am. So the question is, have we lost our way? And I think the answer is absolutely. I think we have entirely lost our minds. And I think it's for a fundamental reason. We've disconnected the what we're doing from why we're doing it. And so what we're doing, in my opinion, is we're trying to attack a problem with a bunch of parts instead of putting the parts together to attack the problem. And I think that's part of the legacy of being in this market. I mean, all of us had started being voice people or messaging people or video people, sometimes more than one of the above. But we never do a lot of work in combining those pieces together to solve bigger problems. And so I think the tools that we have today, the CPaaS tools, really are giving us bags of parts. But the real problem is how do you put the bags of parts in good ways? And we're not thinking about making tools that do that for us. So that's what I think.
Excellent. Thank you, Thomas. Any other panel members want to comment on that? And you can also use the microphones at the front there as well. They should be live.
Yeah, I think my perspective on it is that from a CPaaS and programmable communication APIs, there's a lot of brilliant things going on and a lot of intelligent solutions, but there's not the recognition that that there's a fracture at a lower level which causes problems for people to mass deploy a lot of solutions. So what I mean is, if you take a look at an enterprise company, they're buying, we often bump, in the work I'm doing, I'm often bumping into a company which is making a messaging decision separate from a voice decision, separate from a phone decision, separate from a video decision. And when they deploy solutions, they often have this fractured environment from a provider perspective. And each layer, those providers may all provide different communication APIs. So you might have at your messaging layer some messaging APIs. At your voice layer, you may be on top of a platform that includes all the range of APIs, but they're just using it for voice. And so when companies want to build solutions, the beauty of CPaaS when it first came out was that it included this range of APIs onto one platform and enabled you to do so many cool things and workflows that you couldn't do before. But what, in practicality, when things get deployed into an enterprise customer, they don't have that combined environment, and they still are dealing with a fractured environment to do it. So like if somebody wanted to send a message, they'd have to use an API on one platform, which isn't connected to their voice. So I think there's that challenge that is holding the industry back.
Anyone else like to comment? Shai?
I think in some sense, if the question is about CPaaS,
yeah.
I mean, you ask kind of a broad question and it could go in a bunch of different directions. But if we're just going to talk about the CPaaS phenomenon, in a way it's kind of a victim of its own success in that, it was this really interesting concept that we should take the hardest parts of telecom and make them programmable and accessible in an easy way. And that was a radical idea 10 years ago. And I think, if we're honest with ourselves, it's succeeded beyond most people's dreams back then. Still a lot of challenges for sure, but in having that success, it really expanded, and a lot of people took that label and applied it to a broader and broader set of things. And so now, so what I mean by victim of its own success is that, this circle that we draw and things we label as CPaaS has become so broad that it's becoming difficult to really decide what's in and outside of this space. So if you want to focus on something, you really need to decide, on some boundaries. And I think, Alan, you've been trying to address this with coming up with a new label for things, right? You've got TADSummit, which is telecom developer, but your newsletter is now
CX Tech.
CX Tech, right? So I think that's just part of the struggle, that we've succeeded at a lot of the original goals, but as a result, where are the boundaries around this overall space that we want to focus on? That's a tricky question.
Yeah, and we will be addressing that tomorrow, so that's a good lead into some of the presentations I'll be giving around CX Tech. Any other comments from the panelists? Dinesh, Pierre?
Just a quick comment, and if I take the angle of our customer and the daily discussion we have, and they're pretty big customer, and you would expect them to have deep knowledge of telecommunication, communication in general, and what's still striking to us is obviously they know about CPaaS and the big CPaaS names that are out there, but it's still striking how, to some extent, ignorant they are of telecommunication and communication services and how much they need support in the way to build their solution. And of course, they need the API, and the API needs to be frictionless, but by themselves, they won't be able to build their solution. And it still requires a lot of white glove support to help them building the solution, which take a lot of time, and that is to some extent one of the business challenges as well, to close deal rapidly, as you can have such a mass market approach that is so successful if you don't go deeper in the commercial relationship to help building the solution. API based on.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a very good point. And I'm interested to get Dinesh's view on when you're coming in with eCPaaS, how do you position that to enterprises? And do you focus on a particular problem? Do you have a category label? How are you communicating to your enterprise customers the value you're delivering with the platform?
Yeah, so two things. One is, I think, on the earlier one, I think a lot of panelists said the same thing. I think CPaaS has become, for me, it's like if you put on anything, you put a CPaaS, they think, oh, that's the new gadget or the new thing, So you go to the Valley, we do a lot of work there, you can get companies funded, phenomenal valuation that has nothing because they have a video CPaaS platform, So you have another platform that has. So I think it's very confusing. It really kind of confused the market, especially the consumers or the enterprises that are actually looking at this, and what they want to do is they want to really solve business problems. And that's what it is. So we go to a bank. We go to a bank in Singapore, we go to a bank in Brunei, and when we talk to them about, okay, what are some of your issues that you have? Currently still they would use maybe email, or you go to a bank, you actually do a lot of text messaging. They all do it very compartmentalized in a different place. And actually there was one instance that a campaign was run and the wrong attachment was sent through the campaign, and it was a nightmare because it has all the premier customers' information was attached instead of the real brochure there. This is one of the largest listed banks in Asia. So you really so those are the problems that you're solving, because you're really solving real problems. When you come and talk about a platform, you say, okay, this is how your controls are, this is how your authentication, this is how your levels of communication. You're actually at a different scale. So that's where, if you go to an enterprise and start talking to them, and they can relate to it, because this is a problem that they face every day.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the things that leads on from that is, given that focus on enterprise and solving specific, generally customer communication problems, it doesn't tend to be so much more on the employee communications. What's the right go-to-market, though? Because there I see companies struggling. I'll give one example of Apophonica. Europe-based CPaaS, initially was focused on developers, realized the challenge in trying to engage developers to generate significant sales, focused more on the B2B side. Ooh. Well, that's just me, sorry. focus more on the B2B side, but then are going through marketing aggregators with their solutions that focus on particular verticals. So, for example, with a lot of the football clubs, they're on a roll. A lot of football clubs use their messaging platform for communications. I'm just interested to get your perspective. Is it direct? Is it through channels? How to reach enterprises with this, what is basically a massive toolbox of business solutions?
Right. So I think we have seen it actually is two ways. You can actually, one is if you can get department and other departmental discovery. So they can actually go and discover this where they don't need to go to the levels of IT approvals and stuff like that. So you go through that and they actually start experimenting with this, so it's like your Trojan horse, right? You actually go in through one and you start showing the business value, and then after a while, then you get the visibility, and then you actually do more of a, whole thing. So that's one way of actually looking at it. The second thing is, when you see an RFP coming out, then you know that, okay, now this is the time that, all the big boys wants to come and kind of sell you a, $1 million ARR project to you, and then, that's the time that you know that things have really kind of gone sour. So if you really work with more channels, but I think the best approach for us had been more from a, looking at departmental, penetration. You go in, you start looking at, they start doing it, and it goes, then itself kind of bubbles up. That's how a lot of the other technology that have been gone into companies, the real way of kind of doing it rather than going through a big bang, one shot.
Yeah.
Huge sales teams and stuff like that.
So guerrilla sales, it's going in, getting some early adopters, proving out basically the value, and then growing from there. That's a very interesting point. So let's move on from that first question into looking at what are the greatest challenges facing programmable telecoms with respect to enterprise adoption. I mean, Dinesh already gave some of the barriers, but I'm interested from some of the other panelists on what you're seeing. And when I'm saying programmable telecoms, it's beyond CPaaS. So when I say programmable telecoms, it's all the enabling technologies underneath, in-app, public CPaaS, business messaging, and then on top of that, we have all the automation technologies, and then employee communications, customer communications. So I'm covering the whole enterprise stack when I say programmable comms. To give you an example, we keep saying the word UC. Most of the businesses I talk to have no clue what UC is. You say enterprise telephony, they understand what you're talking about. Or PBX, they understand what you're talking about. So I was very interested in, what are some of the barriers? And Pierre raised education remains a massive issue. And it's worse than that, though. It's confusion as well. I showed most of the noise in the industry is utter bollocks because they're seeing cloud all the time. It has to be a cloud-based solution. And it's like, well, no, because it's in Germany, and you need to know the address your data is being kept in. Or you're within a particular compliance industry where you need to keep that customer data on your premises. So again, to all the panelists, interested in your views around this segment and some of the barriers around enterprise adoption. Thomas?
That's a big question.
It's a big question,
yes.
But here, I'll give you a big answer.
Please.
So here's how I think of it. Enterprises purchase solutions, and we are a part of a solution that an enterprise would buy, and an important part. Mm-hmm. However, we're disadvantaged versus the other parts of the solution. So let me just give you a quick for instance. I am a bank, and I want to reduce fraud, so I want to be able to send a text message to a cardholder that says, "Did you make this purchase?" Mm-hmm. And in order for me to do that, a solution, I need a messaging CPaaS to send the message and to receive it. But I also need all the data connectors to all the ERPs that they may have. I need to run the security gauntlet of what the data security is and the data provenance. And I have to be able to migrate it in, support it, et cetera. Yeah. And all of those things are bigger than my little piece, which is the CPaaS. Mm-hmm. And my little piece, which is the CPaaS, gives me no really great insight into how I handle data. How I collect it, not how I store it and manage it from a secure aspect. Yeah. Now, if I was an integrator, a software guy, I'd have a much better chance at that project because It's the software guys who know most of the answers, even though we have a unique thing. So the real challenge is, how do we learn how to sell our stuff when we are not the dominant piece and we don't know what we're talking about? That's, I think, the biggest challenge.
Yeah.
And the answer is to recognize where you are, which is a small but important piece, and then learn how to live in the ecosystem of solution providers that can actually sell something.
And just following on from that point, I'm interested, given your experiences, a lot of times you're working with integrators or solution providers to be part of that broader solution. But historically, that's been a very difficult channel because they love to talk about your little piece of technology in terms of the overall solution, but don't necessarily sell through. It'll be that's later, that's phase 2, that's phase 3 that never comes.
I have a big answer for that one, too.
Go for it.
My big answer for that one is, unfortunately, most of what we've done historically is easily commoditized. It's very easy to take a voice solution and pick another voice solution because what's the difference? And the reason why it's easily commoditized is because there's no hysteresis. The voice solution you used yesterday doesn't matter about the voice solution you use today.
Yep.
However, that's not true for every communications technology. For instance, texting carries data which might be important yesterday, which is now important today. If I have to move, then I might be losing the data that I had.
Yep.
And that's one example, right? So being able to have some sort of hysteresis in your offer, again, allows you to actually build up a place where you're not easily displaced, because that hard to replicate data is not easily displaced.
Yeah, and that's a very good point, because I see a lot of, I'm not going to name names, but where the integrator sort of pushes out that provider after the initial trials because they realize they can replicate that piece. So it's having that defensible value. Shai.
I mean, I think back to your question, the original question about the challenges basically facing. I mean, I think two things. First, a lot of people who created CPaaS started out as brilliant programmers simplifying an extremely complex problem, and they built solutions that they said at the end of it, they said, my grandma could write this program, right? I mean, so they're very good at creating APIs, simplifying it, making it easy to use, yet that's not true in that their grandma could write that program because there's they think that that's going to translate into business people writing programs. And the reality is most there's still a huge skill gap between the API they created and what business people out there can do or your average person. And then also, when we're talking about CPaaS in terms of delivering programmable APIs and the ability for people to deploy solutions, I think that falls flat when you're talking about most enterprises because most IT people, they're good at plugging stuff together and putting it in place. They're not developers. They're not, they write some scripts and things like that. So there's a huge skill gap for what they're going to do. But even if there wasn't a skill gap on what they're going to do, they're being driven by business needs. So back to Dinesh's point, which I completely agree with, is you're finding either a need in a business or you're finding a vertical solution that's driving it in. And then as time goes, I think the evolution of the ability to have programmable capabilities in other areas of the business is coming. I think it's just more of a 10 or 20-year type of experience because you have kids who are taking programming classes in 8th grade now. By the time they graduate with they get a business degree in undergrad, they're still going to be probably the quality of programmer I was when I graduated, right? So they're going to have those capabilities. But I circled a little bit there, but I think that's the big gap is we really don't have that skill set mix. So we have to have a solution for them.
Excellent. No, that's a really good point because Frank, he's out there. I see all your posts on LinkedIn around all the challenges you face in communicating the value of MEO to enterprises. So I am just focusing in on, sorry, picking on you because you are in the enterprise space day in, day out. How are you selling? And I know you're not, but you're the inspirational guy. So you're the guy basically getting the customer excited and wanting to buy it. How are you selling MEO to them?
Yeah, I think when you sell something and position something, you always have to deliver the value of who you're talking to. And IT people are different than business people. But and it comes down to either saving money or you're making somebody money.
Yeah.
And for IT people, it's a little different. Usually, it's how do you make their life better? How do you make sure that they have a job in a few years? How do you, there may be an underlying current that they want to make everything perform better and work better for the business, but they're not IT people, and from their mindset, they're often a little, they're always interested in something technical that's a challenging problem that they can work on that often gets disassociated from the value of the business. So, when you're talking to these people about these communication platforms, you have to align the value to what they are. So for IT people, I'm constantly talking about how it'll streamline their IT operations, how they can get more done with less time, how it's an important part of an initiative they can drive into the business. And then on the business side, we're talking typically about some ROI around the business model for that solution that you're talking about. So you try to make sure everybody sees the value of what they're getting.
Gotcha. That's clear. So let's move on. We've seen quite a few CPaaS acquisitions. It seems to go in phases. There was like a really early phase, and then let's call it the Nexmo phase, where we saw a whole host of CPaaS acquisitions, and we're in a new phase. We recently saw 8x8 acquiring a CPaaS. So I'm interested in the panelists' view on your prognosis. A lot of acquisitions have failed. Some have been very successful, pointing in over at Tony there in the audience. So to the panelists, what's your prognosis on some of the CPaaS acquisitions we're seeing of late, where UCaaS providers, because they believe the BS out there that you must have UCaaS, CPaaS, and CSaaS, are making those acquisitions? What's likely to happen?
I think what the acquirers are really looking for is a company that has solved the problem of the user experience for a certain developer segment.
Okay.
And that's a really tricky problem to solve. In the headline is, let's make telecoms programmable. Let's make everything an API. Let's make things easy. That's a good concept. But the next layer of detail is where things get tricky, because there are, if you make things too granular, you are excluding a large number of companies. You make things too simplistic, then you're excluding other companies. And finding that balance is very tricky. Just to look at Twilio, for example, they started with a very strong focus on API only, and then they introduced a visual product called Studio, and now they've circled back to a command line interface. And so what you're seeing is them trying to fit to different constituents and match the style of work that those different groups want to use. And this is a very tricky challenge, and I think that really what drives the most recent acquisitions and probably the next few we're going to see is not that there is a particular technology that's there. It's not that the company being acquired has figured out something different in terms of the capabilities. It's more about, have they figured out a better way to communicate to the developers, the users, at the right level of abstraction, at the right trade-off between complexity and usability. And that is, that's not something you can just summarize in some sort of engineering stats. That's really about being able to understand that audience and what details are they going to want, what level of control do they want, what level of control is going to be the turnoff. And that's as much art as science. It's really about being in touch with a particular demographic. That is probably the driving force between the most recent and the coming acquisitions that we'll see.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. And actually, Dinesh, maybe you could share some of your experiences between the API offer and the wizard offer that you had within IdeaMart. And some of your experiences there, because I think people don't fully appreciate the different segments and how you had to build not just the web tools, but the whole community engagement within the country.
Right. Yeah, so what I think this was maybe about 5-6 years back when we started kind of bringing a platform with telcos. This is mostly the Asiata group in Asia. We actually introduced first the just the API, but then what we realized was that APIs really didn't kind of create any services. And then we went and actually discussed with them and said, okay, we're going to bring a certain set of wizards and we're going to kind of create a marketplace. And the operators didn't believe with us. And then they said, no, that's not going to work. And they said, no, we would like to try it out. And they said, okay, as long as, we can do revenue share with you, we'll give it to you to do it. Exactly. And so we did that, and within, it took us about 6 months. Actually, we did a case study one time at TADS. And then when it started picking up, it was kind of growing almost like a hockey stick. And the revenues were so much, when then they came back to us and said, okay, now we want to roll it out with the rest of the telcos, but we want you to license it. We don't want to give you any more revenue share. So because they realized that, this was creating a huge kind of an impact in the market. So then we actually worked with them, actually build that up. And the real success for that was because we were able to bring non-developers to come and build services. And with that, there's close to about 17 new startups were started on that. And they actually used the CPaaS platform to really bring business value. And that started, and they started kind of selling the same solutions in the region because it was our same platform was launched. So that actually you see the value is created not by just having the APIs exposed, but being able to use the APIs to bring real business value.
Exactly. I think that's a good point in terms of when it was, you were essentially running it on behalf of. That created a very different dynamic to letting the telco try.
Right. So the whole idea was actually we took and, we had dev evangelists and others because telcos just work from 9 to 5, and we had people call you at, midnight because they are kind of stuck on something, and you had to have people to be able to help them. And that's what really kind of took it off. And once the ball started rolling, then it started gathering momentum, and it was.
Yeah, that's a good point. I always, when I talk to telcos, I say, we've got TADAC coming up this weekend. And they're like, oh, it's a weekend. I don't work weekends. I was like, no, it's about learning, sharing, creating, and understanding the future of your business. Don't work weekends. So that's a very good point. Also, one point I'd like to highlight, we see a lot, Mitel, some of the other UCaaS providers claim we have a CPaaS. Well, it's not really a CPaaS because you have to buy the UCaaS solution, and it's some APIs on their, essentially, instance that you've deployed for that enterprise. So I sort of use the term private CPaaS. So we're seeing acquisitions of public CPaaS companies, but it's a UCaaS company. Now, what's going to happen there? Are they going to adopt the UCaaS business, or will they sort of co-opt it into a private CPaaS? Just interested again, if any of the panelists have any ideas or thoughts about the issues of viability of that.
I think I'm going to get a reputation for being negative. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I'm willing to risk it, though. So I think it's a dead end. And I think UCaaS is in itself a dead end. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is because so many of the design decisions were made around an assumption which no longer holds, which is the assumption was that people were calling from their kitchens, that we have a kitchen phone landline mentality, that there at some point is a equivalence between voice and messaging, where actually we'd be thinking about the endpoint, not the mode, where we need to be designing for smartphones, not landlines. And so as we pick the ways in which our communications work, they should be picked from the palette of what people actually use, which is smartphones. So the reason why I am dismissive of UCaaS and CPaaS is that the whole idea that the biggest problem that we have to solve is to handle all these different messaging communications modes is the most important problem. I don't think so. The most important problem is that we actually design for what people use, which is a smartphone. And so we would be making opinionated decisions around how to best communicate with a smartphone, as opposed to building systems which can handle anything which don't have an opinion. Thus, I think CPaaS and UCaaS kind of dies because it's the wrong assumption.
Good point. I'll just open it up to the audience. Do we have any questions from the audience? We've been chatting up here for a little bit now.
I want to just give a shout out to that grid you made of explaining the different flavors of CPaaS. That's the best, because I know you're modest, so someone's got to say it. Alan's done the best sort of dissection and what's the term I'm looking for? Vivisection. The best breakdown of terminology. I haven't seen anything better so far of what that term means.
Again, it's on my weblog. Moving on, because you brought it up, with UCaaS, will it ever achieve its dream? I know I'm encouraging you to be negative, but there is value. But again, I think it's understanding the reality of the situation you're in, understanding the endpoint, as when I say the endpoint, not the device, the customer or the employee. Is it ever going to achieve its dream? Or will diversity reign?
What is the dream exactly?
Oh, UCaaS, in that you will have a enterprise communication system that does voice, video, collaboration, messaging, all from one provider.
I think the problem there is not that. I think there's, you're sort of chasing the horizon in that people have this funny habit of changing the way they like to work all the time. And so, you could solve for exactly the way people work today and build a product, but already, if you look under the surface, there are the seeds of some new mode of working, and there's just there's the social dynamic. There's the official way that the company communicates, and then there's, the younger folks that set up their own Slack channel or some other system that's either official or tolerated, and sorry, I meant unofficial or just official, but or tolerated but not official, and that then becomes the seeds of some new mode of communication that slowly becomes more mature, and then the folks that want to be even more sort of off to the side come up with another way of communicating, and our attitudes and style of working with video conferencing and phone conferencing and chatting and the way we switch between that, it's just so much a fickle thing. It's just so driven by our social fads and habits that catch on in one organization or from one group to the next. So this is just a factor of human nature that's not going to go away, and so we're never going to get to this dreamland of a single software package that captures all the infinite varieties that people in an organization want to communicate in. But I also don't think that's a bad thing, because that's part of what keeps it exciting to work in a group of people.
I think I don't think we'll be on one platform for most companies as well. And I would just add on to that, when you're looking at the largest companies, the 50,000 to 100,000 person companies, because often the communication capabilities are tied to a different platform. Well, because there's physical, to put in a platform, even if it's cloud-based, there's still a lot of physical infrastructure that has to go in. So, and that's not going to change for a while. So when these large companies are making a platform decision or a communications decision at any of these layers, it's literally taking them 24 months to roll out that solution. So finally, when they fully rolled out that solution, they're rolling out a new solution for something else. So you talk to a 50,000, 100,000 person company, they have 2 or 3 different communications platforms, all in different stages of adoption, and they can't move out faster than 24 months because there's so much physical capabilities they want to do. They want to put in a new room system. They got to go do 10,000 conference rooms. They want to put in new phones. They have to go to 70,000. So physically, they just can't switch stuff on a dime. I think for when you're talking about CPaaSs or communication platforms tied to a carrier where it's more tied to the core network and less hardware infrastructure, you have more flexibility. But just for large companies, I don't see them ever getting on one platform, just simply from a rollout perspective. They haven't delinked kind of the hardware infrastructure from the communication layer, you know,
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So
I think that's an excellent point. And again, there's a big country difference. Again, it comes to Shai's point in terms of it's a social. And if we look at, say, China versus Japan versus Indonesia, I mean, if we pick on China, because, shall we say, the rule of IT isn't as strong as in some Western large enterprises, you have a complete bypass layer of WeChat and the mobile phone as the dominant communication mechanism. Even though within the large enterprise, they have messaging, they have an enterprise telephony system, it's a complete bypass by all the employees. So again, I think it's interesting we have that sort of cultural issue as well. So cool. Let's just wrap up, I think, with just one more question. I'm just sort of thinking which one to pick on. I guess I was looking at customer communications one, but I don't want to preempt your session, Shai. So, because Shai will be running a session after lunch, so I want to leave that one. But I guess I'll just wrap up just from each of the panelists on, I think we've highlighted, the challenges in just being an enabler and the fact that you have to sit within an ecosystem. I think we've really done a good job in exposing the issues. It's a guerrilla sales approach that we have to do, and then try and survive as that gets broader adoption within the enterprise. But I'm just interested in the panelists' view as we look out over the next 5 years. I'm not asking 10, whatever. In the next 5 years, what do you see happening around this whole programmable telecoms space? Is it just going to consolidate into Cisco, Genesis, all the sort of big providers? Is it going to remain an integration headache? Are the SIs going to come in, the solution providers like IBM, and provide solutions? Well, that's for the large companies. But what about the majority of companies that are out there that are small, medium enterprises? Are we going to see more integrated solution providers? I've just, general question. What's your predictions around the future of programmable telecoms over the next 5 years? Anybody want to take a first stab? Go on, Thomas wants to do it.
Okay, so here's my prediction for the next 5 years of programmable telecom. Two things will happen. The first thing that will happen is CPaaSs will grow up in the stack from simply being things that send and receive messages to things that take care of sessions. So they'll be handling things at the conversation layer, not at the transaction messaging layer. And that will induce all of the high-level solution providers like Accenture, et cetera, to solve real workflow problems because they'll be able to handle, because they'll be optimized for the session. And so you'll see Bain and all these big shops provide, generalized workflow solutions that really solve CX problems and staffing problems, et cetera. And so that's going to make the traditional CPaaS seem less interesting because they're more of a bag of parts. And for the new generation of CPaaS that's handling sessions and session layer stuff to be more interesting because that's at the right abstraction level that an Accenture can handle it and deliver value.
Excellent. Well done. Thank you, Thomas. Shai, Dinesh, Pierre.
So I think I would say maybe the next 2 years, I would say there will be a certain level of convergence that's going to happen. And you will see that happening through both in department level, and that's something I think there's a great opportunity for a lot of the CPaaS providers to make it easy, make sure that you're solving real business problems, not just for the sake of kind of bringing a solution. So I think in the next, at least for the next 2 years, we see that coming in mainly because of what's happening with all the new ways that you need to communicate with the millennials, whether it's through Facebook, whether it's through WhatsApp, whether it's through Snapchat. So I think that part of it going to kind of converge, and I think we'll see something very interesting in that area.
Oh, that's a good point.
I mean, I agree with that, but I see also an opportunity, and I expect some big cloud players that will take up a role in the CPaaS space. Those who have a big market selling to enterprises and can consolidate and have big software capabilities as well.
I mean, Amazon is a good example. It's already assembling so many parts there.
And I see that happening in less than 5 years.
Yeah. Anything else from the panelists? Any other questions from the audience? Speak now or forever hold your peace. If not, please show your appreciation for an excellent panel, guys. Thank you and well done.